Hi, everyone. Welcome to Nom Watch Review, part of Nom Talk Network. On this show, we review the latest film drops or throwback celebrating a milestone while eating and drinking our favorite snacks and drinks. I'm your host, Erric Ramirez, and right now I'm having a lovely, lovely seltzer water because water is important. And I'm currently actually waiting on dinner because my lovely roommates decided to make stuffed bell peppers. So the smells are killing me right now, but I'm excited to eat that here soon. But I'm excited to introduce you to our guests today. Today we have Carolyn and Derrick. Derrick, go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody out there.
Yeah, hey guys, very excited to be back. Super excited to talk about the Evil Dead franchise. I think I don't know if it qualifies, but we'll get into it. I am eating some mixed nuts. I am drinking. It's very lame, but I'm just drinking some like hibiscus juice.
That sounds good though.
It is pretty good, actually. It's pretty good. I'm trying to cut down on my drinking, so we're sticking with the juice.
Aren't we all? Quarantine and everything like that upped all of our drinking, I think.
Right. Right.
But my other guest is Carolyn. Carolyn, go ahead and introduce yourself and what are you eating and drinking?
Hi, it's always good to be back. I am drinking the Souls of the Innocent. It only looks like water, and the Flesh of My Enemies that only looks like Danishes. So
Ooh.
I went a little overboard today. I was just feeling myself. I don't know.
Something came over you. You don't know what it is.
I don't know.
No, but those Danishes do look delicious. Though I wish I had some.
Good. Vaughn's best $6 ever spent. Oh my god.
Yeah, no. But everybody out there, now welcome our guests. But today, like Derrick kind of mentioned, we're talking about all the franchise that of this is. We are talking about Evil Dead 2 a little bit, Army of Darkness, the remake Evil Dead that came out in 2013, and then the other things that came out like the Evil Dead musical and all of that. There's a lot to talk about. But first, what I want to talk about is this franchise. I want to know when you guys first came in contact with the Evil Dead franchise, starting with the original Evil Dead with Sam Raimi, and what were your thoughts? Did you guys enjoy it? We'll start with you on this one, Carolyn.
So I came in contact with the Evil Dead first, ironically, with Army of Darkness, and I didn't have the highest opinion of it initially because it just seemed like a very strange zombie movie because you had all of these different characters and you had this very prototypical hero, and I didn't understand. There were people who were, being creepy and stuff like that, and there were, audience callbacks and things. So I liked it, but for me initially, it had more of a vein of Rocky Horror, and I let it slide until the 2013 version, and I was like, oh, this is not like Rocky Horror. But the 2013 version was so visually stunning. I mean, it was truly, cinematography wise, it was truly a work of art, and it paid so many homages to Raimi. And then naturally, I'm the Marvel person, and when Raimi did Doctor Strange and he had all those very subtle Evil Dead references in Doctor Strange, I was like, I know what you did, and you put it in Disney. Well done. But as far as the franchise goes, yeah, I had it connected to me on the Midnight Circuit, and then I discovered it's actually spooky. So.
Yeah. And Derrick, where did you first come across this franchise?
Yeah, kind of similarly. I think I've always had knowledge of Evil Dead as kind of this almost like litmus test of horror and kind of this barometer of if you want to be a horror fan, you have to invest in Evil Dead in some way. And so I've actually never really been a horror fan. And so for me, it wasn't anything that I didn't have any direct attachment to it. I'd known about Army of Darkness as kind of like a referential jumping off point. And so peripherally, I understood all of the references. I know who Ash was, the chainsaw, everything that you come to know about kind of the iconography of Evil Dead. I knew about, but I didn't have the film to put them into context. And strangely, very similar to your story, Once I saw the Evil Dead remake, I kind of went in lying as if I'd known that, like, oh yeah, I know all about Evil Dead. I didn't at all. I knew that this was a remake and I had to check it out. And so I remember watching it and I had the very same reaction to you, where I was like, wow, this is just a visceral horror experience. Like, this is just nasty and mean and violent and just gorgeously crafted for a horror film. Then I was like, okay, I need to go back and see what all of these foundations are actually built on. So since then, I have now seen pretty much everything. I've seen Evil Dead Rise. I think the only thing I haven't seen is the musical, but I did watch the whole series, Ash versus Evil Dead. So now I'm pretty versed in it. I don't know that it's my favorite series across the board, but I understand why it is such a cult classic in general, and in the cultural zeitgeist as well. So.
Oh yeah, no, I'm right there with you. My first experience, I definitely grew up with Evil Dead. I have horror in my family, like everybody loves it. So I grew up watching Evil Dead 2, and then went back to 1, and then saw Army of Darkness, and was trepidatious about the remake, but actually quite enjoyed it. But getting it, oh well, and then also like the house I live in, I don't know if you guys can see this. I have Necronomicons. There's an Evil Dead board game. My roommates have Evil Dead memorabilia. I have a Kandarian dagger here at my house. Like the fans of this franchise are on a different level because I think of the horror comedy of it, which we're about to get into with Evil Dead 2. Evil Dead 2 was actually, me looking it up and watching it, everything like that, was considered a reboot remake, because the studio didn't really like Evil Dead 1, but were letting them do the Evil Dead 2, so they had them redo the entire movie again. That's why Ash goes back to the cabin with his girlfriend, and then all hell breaks loose with the Necronomicon and everything like that. And at the end of Evil Dead 2, he gets sucked into the portal with his car. That takes us to Evil Dead 3. Now, the beginning with Evil Dead 3, he gets thrown into the past, into like knights and everything like that, and they're having an issue with demons and the Necronomicon and everything, and they look to him like he's their savior, to get the Necronomicon back, save their lands, and be able to come back into the future. Now, doing the research on this, like, the studio wanted a complete departure from the previous two. They didn't want it to be Evil Dead 1. They didn't want it to be Evil Dead 2. That's why I feel Sam Raimi went more the comedy route with this one, because there's a lot more shtick and a lot more comedy in this and not as much horror. But also in the naming of it, Army of Darkness, they didn't not want him to even connect it to the other movies at all. He really originally wanted to call it Medieval Dead. So they made him change it to Army of Darkness, and like,
better title, honestly, if you're trying to connect it.
Right. I mean, and still in some of the like UK markets, you can get copies that say Army of Darkness Medieval Dead, but they're very rare. But talking about Army of Darkness, I do want to get your guys' popcorn ratings. I gave it 3.5 just because the humor in it was a complete departure for me. I still find it funny. I still enjoy it as a movie, but it was just, for the franchise that they had been building up, was way too different for me, especially when I saw it. And even now, it's not my favorite one to go back to, but I will watch it. So 3.5 is unfortunately where I have to go. Carolyn, what is your popcorn rating for Army of Darkness?
You pretty much nailed where I'm at with Army of Darkness. For someone seeing how the first film looked, and then you get the second one that kind of leaned into it a little bit. I always looked at it as kind of like a spoof, of the slasher films, even though we're kind of in the golden age of the slasher era. And then you go into this and you're like, it really does feel more like a Rocky Horror Call It. So you miss out on what the core of the franchise is, at least to me. And then also the VFX for me. I'm the person that calls out the VFX for what they were. They were very good. Like the glass stuff, it was just, I wanted, it was such a popcorn movie. It felt like completely two different films. So fortunately, I'm 100%, fortunately and 100% fortunately, unfortunately, I'm like right there with you, because I would have liked to have seen Medieval Dead. I think Medieval Dead would have been funnier. And then at the end, when he has, you know, the thing where it's like he goes and you don't know, in like the cutscene where he goes, like, you don't know where he is, if he's in the future, if he's in the past. Because I remember there's like a cut ending, right, where he did end up in the future. I was reading about that.
Yes,
yeah, so you don't know if,
ending.
Yeah,
there's a whole different movie in the director's cut.
Correct. Yeah.
So I wasn't able to find the director's cut, but see, you had a whole opportunity to spin it off into a massive spoof of all of these different movies, and you know, make comments on the zombie genre, if you will, if you had leaned into that, you know, campiness. But he didn't want to lean into the campiness. He wanted to lean into the spooky. So that dissonance for me is where my 3.5 comes in. It's still a great film. Bruce Campbell alone in this could sell.
Yep.
That man could sell water to a river. I mean, like, honestly, he's just funny. So I love him in this. And that's a big portion of it. But yeah, that's where I'm going with this.
Well, yeah, no, and I'm right there with you, especially with you mentioning Bruce Campbell. Like, Bruce Campbell is this franchise for what we call it. Like, people come back for him, like Ash versus the Evil Dead. People came back because he was coming back. Even the newer ones that they're coming back, he's executive producing with Sam Raimi. So it's good to have that he's still a part of this franchise and bringing his thoughts to it. But mentioning how you were saying that there's a different ending. Yeah, there's a totally different ending to the second film, to where Ash, at the end of the movie, goes into a cave with his car and takes this sleeping potion. For every drop, it's like 1,000 years or something. It takes a little bit too much. So when he wakes up, he's actually in like a dystopian future. And they were going to actually make a fourth movie going off of that. But the studio had them reshoot the ending of the movie because it was a little bit too Mad Max for them. And they already had Mad Max, so they didn't want it to go into that direction. So they made them push it towards a little bit more of the comedy.
Mad Max Evil Dead crossover?
Yeah, sign me up.
Well, yeah, no, and like that wasn't the first time either. Even with the ending of the first movie into the second movie, they had him go and change stuff in the first movie and redo it on the second one. The end of the second one, they had him go and do it. So the studio was constantly throwing stuff at Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell to be like, we know this is the movie you made, but we need you to change it. So they were just hitting back and forth with the studio. But Derrick, what is your popcorn rating about?
I think this might be the first time where everybody's aligned with the same ratings for both movies, actually. I largely agree with pretty much both of you guys. I think that this one, it almost feels like a film unto itself. And whether that's studio meddling or Raimi trying to lean into different things, like you can essentially just watch Army of Darkness and that's it. Like you don't. There's nothing really attaching itself to it outside of the Necronomicon and Ash. And like you said, Bruce Campbell he's literally Army of Darkness. Like, the movie does not work if you don't have Bruce Campbell just hamming it up to the absolute max that he possibly can. It is basically a non-functioning film if you don't have somebody like Bruce Campbell just giving this committed comedic performance in this role as Ash. And I think when people look back fondly on things like Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, they don't really look at the movies as a whole. They look at it and how much they love this particular character and the things that he does. And like most of the iconography that's born out of those early adaptations or born early out of those early films, it's all Ash. Like, everything is all Ash. It's all everything that involves him. And I think this movie really kind of solidifies that comedic styling of it. I don't think a lot of the things work as well over time. I don't think it stands the test of time as well as I think people want it to. I think there's a lot more trying to will it into greatness. And I don't know that actually works. I was watching it today and I was like, man, this feels more like a sketch parody than it does an actual like film. Like, it just, and some of that's just 90s. Like, 90s movies just did that. Like, they're very 90s cinema has a very difficult time telling one solid narrative story. It's usually a hodgepodge of ideas that somehow coalesce into something that fits into a 90-minute movie. But you can definitely feel the studio meddling. You can feel the push and pull with Raimi, which is strange because I feel like that's been his whole career. Like his whole career has been this battle against the studio where he's given all this money to do these things, but then they don't let him do the things that he wants to do. Now, I feel like that happens constantly, and you see it very clearly in something like Army of Darkness. But I do think the movie is still a lot of fun. There's still a lot of fun to be had. Bruce Campbell drops some of the best lines in the whole series. He's just great. And, you know, for all its faults, it's still a pretty fun watch. It's a pretty, like you said, it's a pretty solid popcorn movie where you just turn the lights off and laugh and throw some popcorn in your mouth and forget about it as soon as it's over.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. For me, like Army of Darkness, like you said, is a popcorn movie where you could put it on and just have a good time. It's a good time movie. Where a lot of the movies in the early 90s were, some of them were not, but this one is one of those easy, even today, even though like the claymation was awesome and everything like that. And like some of the things didn't age as well, but it's still a stand-up movie in that respect. I do want to jump into the chat because we do have some comments already. Q's in the chat. Hi, Q. Nice to see you every week. But Q says, when I saw Evil Dead, I was like, what is this? It's really crazy, messed up movie. And I saw Army of Darkness. I was like, horror and comedy? Will it work? Well, it did. LOL. He also says he did see the 2013 remake. It was okay, but he hasn't seen the new one yet. But Q Ball gives 5 out of 5 for Army of Darkness. Wow. It's the best of both worlds of horror and comedy. And I have to agree with Q Ball on this one. The horror comedy aspect that they did go into it with, out of a lot of the horror comedies that I've seen, especially I just did the review for Renfield, which is a horror comedy, and I hated it. But that horror comedy I had to grade really low. But this one still, even though it hits the middle of the pack for me, is still a very good horror comedy for me. More relying on the comedy base of it. Do you think that this movie was a good horror comedy for the time, and it still stands up to other horror comedies that have come out since then? We'll start with you on this one, Derrick.
I would actually say no.
Okay.
I actually think the better version of the blend of horror comedy, especially, and this is, again, it's something that's so bizarre to me because Raimi is such a like a prognosticator of his own work, right? Like the things that he does in something like Evil Dead 2 set the tone for what horror comedy will become some 20 years later. Like when you watch something like Army of Darkness, there's no such thing as horror comedy. It doesn't exist in this time period, really. People are just starting to blend those things, and they borrow a shit ton from the things that Raimi does. But I would actually argue that Evil Dead 2, whether intentionally or unintentionally, I would actually argue that that one is a little bit better as a fully functioning horror comedy because I think it leans into both more equally and on balance, where yes, I think you can make the argument that it's probably more horror than comedy, but that comedy feels more intentional in that remake of Evil Dead 2 than it does in Evil Dead, which feels like, I want to make a horror movie, but I've got no money, so this is what we're doing. And then we all look back on it retrospectively and be like, oh my God, that's so cheesy and so campy. And that's not really what he was trying to do. So then you get Evil Dead 2, and even with all the meddling that you get from the studio, it feels a little bit more balanced in the horror comedy balance that he's trying to do. Whereas Army of Darkness for me just leans all the way to the far left of, being just fully fledged comedy. Like there's nothing... any horror that exists in this movie is undercut by a joke. Like all of the Deadites are not scary in any way, shape, or form. They're all jokes. They're all joke machines. Like there's no real horror involved in this. So yeah, I would actually say that Army of Darkness is fully fledged comedy with very little horror. And I think Evil Dead 2 is a little bit more of a straight line between the two.
Okay. Yeah, no, I see what you're talking about. And Carolyn, what are your thoughts on this horror comedy of Army of Darkness, Evil Dead 2, and where it's come and everything?
Well, I agree with Derrick on the idea that Army of Darkness kind of leans all the way into comedy because it's got much more of an 80s camp feel than Evil Dead 2. Evil Dead 2 does kind of balance it out. I just don't think people knew what to do with that yet.
Yeah.
So that's where the idea that that's where the idea that Army of Darkness might go, oh, this is a horror comedy, because there's so many pieces of Evil Dead. If you've seen the first one and then you've seen the second one, you're looking at it and you're like, I don't know what to make of this. I don't know what to do with it. And then you get an Army of Darkness, and Army of Darkness feels like something that people can relate to, because while it was an early 90s film, it does have a lot of those 80s tropes with, like, you know, the muscly shirtless man, and then the Deadites, and then the mad, even though it's not Mad Max vibes of the dystopia, it does kind of give, like, you know, people trapped in an area with the evil king and all that other stuff.
Yep.
It gives 80s to me, so it doesn't really have that horror comedy aspect. It just leans straight into camp horror, you know, like horror, camp horror, comedy horror, like.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it definitely.
It's
see
not
that.
horror comedy. I just 100% agree with what Derrick was saying, because
There she is.
There you go. You're back.
But no, I gathered in general kind of what she was saying about it just being, and it's true. It is very 80s. It's very more camp horror, cult horror. It's not. It doesn't have definitions in the way that it exists today. We can look back on it and add our own misnomers, but like that's not really what's happening in the time. And so I agree. Like, you watch these and like, we can classify them now, but if you watch them in the time, like, there's nothing to classify it as. You have no idea what to do with it. And then you get to Army of Darkness, and it's just got all of these 80s tropes. I loved your Mad Max crap. Like, that is, I never even realized how much it borrows from those types of things, and just setting and style and hero tropes and all of that. So I totally get what you're saying.
Oh yeah, no, I completely agree with what both of you were saying about it. That it was especially going more into the camp horror and everything like that. Now moving into the camp horror, we are going to touch a little bit based off of the musical. And with what everything you just said of it going into camp horror makes complete sense of the musical. I know neither one of you have seen it yet. If you get the chance to go see this musical, it is ridiculous, over the top camp. It's set like the first movie, with everything happens where she gets shoved in the basement, everything like that. But also there's a singing moose. There is also a splash zone in the musical. So the first 3 rows get covered in blood every night from just people dying. Like, if you get a chance, see it, but it's super campy, like you were saying, super campy, super funny. And that makes sense, exactly what you were saying, Carolyn, of like, that's what they did. And it wasn't the horror comedy, it was the camp comedy. Mm-hmm. But now we're going to move in. Oh, wait, Cue Ball redeemed hydrate. So everybody hydrate. Thank you, Q. But now we are going to move in to the 2013 remake of Evil Dead. So this movie, once I pull it back up, it says 5 friends head to a remote cabin where the discovery of a book of the dead leads them to literally summon demons living in the nearby woods. So this movie is very much like the first Evil Dead movie, but different characters and a lot more bloody. So Carolyn, what are your thoughts on this remake of Evil Dead? Like, do you think that it stood up to what Sam Raimi was trying to do and everything else? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, when I first saw it, I did not understand that this was supposed to be an actual Evil Dead movie, because once again, it leaned into the horror camp for me. People are like, "Oh, this is supposed to be funny," and I went and watched it, and I was just like, "This is not funny. I mean, it's funny, not funny, haha. It's funny. I'm glad that's not me, but it's not funny." And but then I appreciate it for what it is. I appreciate it for horror film. I have to wonder, and I wasn't able to find anything about it, so I'm curious if you would know what Sam Raimi actually thought of it, because if that's what he was trying to do with the original film, then maybe like, you know, this was seeing his vision brought to fruition. For me, I loved it. It is a genuinely beautiful film. I rented it and then I bought it today because I didn't own it. And I was just like, I needed to own it because it's such a good, it is pure, where you have things that lean all the way into comedy. It's interesting that you pair Army of Darkness and this, because we have something that leans all the way, that leans into the comedy in the camp. This goes all the way to horror. And this is the quintessential, like, things in the woods and, you know, mystery, and even the horror of like addiction. It deals with so many different very genuinely spooky things. And Jane Levy is to this movie what Bruce Campbell was to the franchise. I don't think she'd ever come back for another one, but what she did in this was just like, chills.
So good. And we'll definitely get into that. Derrick, what were your thoughts on this remake of Evil Dead?
Yeah, I agree pretty much wholeheartedly. I think if you're, it is such a great pairing, especially having watched them both so recently. You really take the polar opposites and talk about them, where it's, you know, you take something like Evil Dead 2, and if you're gonna split them straight down the middle, then you get Evil Dead 2013 and you get Army of Darkness. Like, that's almost exactly how the pieces fall. But I agree. I forgot how much I enjoyed this movie. I remember when I saw it back in 2013, and I really haven't gone back to it since. But I remember thinking, especially not having the cult fervor that I think everybody else has with the Evil Dead franchise, not being so familiar with it, I just remember leaving being like, God, that was a nasty horror movie, and I'm kind of into it. Like, this was pretty great. So rewatching it, you know, I'm blown away by just how beautiful it is. It is a gorgeously shot horror film. I just the not even just the brutality and the ability to demonstrate the brutality, but just the atmosphere that it's able to create, and just the direction and the cinematography. Like, you feel trapped as you watch this film. You feel trapped in this cabin with these people, and I think using addiction really smartly kind of almost immediately causes you to invest in these characters. It gives them a reason for being there outside of just 5 dumb teens showing up at a cabin. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a genuine purpose as to why they're there. There's a genuine purpose as to why they're overstaying their welcome. And it just makes you just instantly invest in them. So when shit starts going down, you feel for every horrible thing that happens to these people. Like, you care about all of that. And it's so fantastically made. And Jane Levy is just, I forgot she was in this movie. I legitimately forgot, right? Because I'm a huge Zoe Infinite's Playlist person. And the dichotomy of talent from being able to pull this off and then being able to pull whatever she does 8 years later in Zoe's Infinite Playlist, I was like, holy shit, put this woman in everything. Like, how is she not like your scream queen and your comedy queen at the same time? Because God, can she do both very well.
Oh yeah. No, I definitely had the same thoughts. Going into the remake in 2013 when it was coming out, like I said, I was a little hesitant to go see it because I obviously love the franchise of Evil Dead and everything like that. But also I was kind of overseeing studios and everything do versions of Evil Dead, like Cabin in the Woods. We have Cabin Fever, like those kind of movies that were pretty much Evil Dead, but just a little bit more horror or comedy. I was very hesitant to see it. Once I did see it, though, I was thoroughly impressed. With Jen Levy and like all of the acting, the practical effects, the fact that, like you said, the drug addiction brought all of us in it to where we actually cared a little bit more about the characters. So I was definitely, I really enjoyed this one. The one that just came out, again, I was a little bit more nervous, and we'll talk about that on Wednesday. But like, I thought they did a really good remake of this movie and brought it to a different light. and the darkness that I didn't expect them to go with. Plus, Mia being the Ash character in the end was fantastic. But I do want to move in and talk about this cast. We have Jane Levy as Mia, Shiloh Fernandez as David, Lou Tyler Pucci as Eric, Jessica Lucas as Olivia, Elizabeth Blackmore as Natalie. And that's all of the people that are in the cabin and eventually die. Spoilers for everybody out there who hasn't seen it. But what did you guys, I know you guys already talked about Jane. What did you guys think about this cast? Were any of them that you like hated? Do you think they should have done something else in their acting? We'll start with you on this one, Carolyn.
So I think the thing that I was sitting there and then Derrick mentioned, and then you brought home, and now I'm going to say it, is that the addiction plot brought us in because they are more than teenagers just going to the woods, but they're still stupid like teenagers.
Yeah.
Because ultimately,
you're talking about Eric, right?
Yeah, I'm actually, yeah, no, I'm definitely, I'm talking about Eric, and I'm talking about Naomi to a point, because her whole thing is like, I'm a nurse, I know what I'm doing, and I'm like, you clearly don't know what you're doing, and the fact that you're administering drugs, it's like, how did you get these drugs? Where did they come from? You know, where did you borrow them from? But I like the idea that you had all of these people who had a legitimate reason for being there. I mean, those kinds of things do happen, but they still had the typical horror character stupidity. You kind of have to have characters that have that horror character, like, I'm going to do a dumb thing, because to borrow from what you said, Eric, about Cabin in the Woods and those things, is that when the characters do those kinds of things, it makes the final girl's survival, makes the Scream Queen survival, the final character's survival, more invested, because you're like, okay, well, this person didn't do all of the dumb things that their friends did. Therefore, this is the person who I should strive to emulate. This is the person who sounded the alarm, who knew that something was wrong, who knew all of this, and that's the person that I should strive to emulate. So you have to almost have, like in Cabin in the Woods, I'm sorry, like in Cabin in the Woods, you almost have to have people play those tropes so that the story works well. And Naomi, and I love the brutality too. The fact that I was reading, and Eric, you can confirm this or not, I guess they did everything practical. So like when you think of some of the things that they did, like the tree, and you think about how that was practical.
We're going to get into the practicalities, because that's a whole other thing.
But the you know, as far as the characters go, yes, Eric was an idiot. Naomi was also kind of an idiot. As far as the they had to be, you respect that.
Yeah.
And then as far as the rest of it, the fact how brutal they all got to, like when Naomi was getting taken over and she was so scared that she peed herself, you're just like, they went there, they did the thing, good for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I'll agree. I think that, you know, you're still making a horror movie, right? So they have to still exist in these horror tropes. And I don't think we really got to, because Cabin in the Woods, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that was a few years later, right? I feel like it was quite a few years later. So I don't think anybody had really gone as far as to point the finger back at the genre, to really kind of expose some of those things and make this big kind of meta commentary on the genre as a whole. So, you know, one thing that I think makes this remake so strong is that, you know, it gives them a reason to be there, and then it lets them be stupid so that they can all die. And doing that, it allows me to invest in each individual person, even when they make the dumbest possible decisions. I still care about their survival. I still care about their safety. I know it's not going to happen. Like their fate is determined the minute they show up, right? So we all know that brutal, horrible, awful, nasty things are going to happen to them. But you're giving me a reason to care for each of them. So when they make these dumb decisions, you've got that person in the back of the theater like, bitch, don't go down there. Like you have that, and it kind of draws that out of you. Everybody I think is on board, and you can tell that everybody's committed. They all know what movie they're making. There's no as far as casting goes, there's nobody here where I'm just like, God, I wish anybody else would be in this role. Like everybody is on board, and you know, it just again, it just allows that nastiness to really take a hold of you and invest in and give you some of that, ooh, just grossness, like where you either want to close your eyes or not look away or peek through your fingers. And that's the kind of stuff you want from a movie like this. If you can't deliver on that, then it's not good. And I feel like they really do deliver. And I think the cast truly understands the movie that they're in.
Yes. No, I'm right there with you in this cast. Like I hated characters, but I didn't hate the actors. Like Eric definitely deserved to die. And it saddens me to say that because my name is Eric. So every time I watch it, I'm just like, well, great. But I did realize that we did skip over, I did with everything talking about all the other Evil Deads and the musical and everything like that. We did skip over popcorn ratings for this one. So I do want to get your guys' thoughts on the remake popcorn ratings that you guys thought. Derrick, what did you give for this movie?
Yeah, I actually gave it a 4. Because I think this one in retrospect is better than most people give it credit for. And I agree, I would love to see if what Raimi's comments are and what his thoughts are on this, because there's a large part of me that feels like this is the movie he wanted to make. And if people just gave him the money without trying to make the movie for him, I feel like this is much more in line with what he wanted to do. He just didn't have the money, resources, or the freedom to really do it. And then they granted somebody else the ability to. So I think that this movie truly holds up. I know we're going to talk about practical effects, but that stuff rips some 10 years later. Like it still looks nasty and it still looks really, really good. And that's hard to do. Horror doesn't age well very often. Most of the time, whatever you're doing in your cutting edge practical effects, like it really looks bad some handful of years later. And this one, like just everything about it, the way that it's all put together and how they make this movie, 10 years later, it still looks great. And I still couldn't believe they were able to do some of these things in there. So 4 out of 5. I really, really like this one.
Yeah. No, I'm right there with you. I definitely give it a 4 out of 5. Was in it, the practical effects, the story, the acting, everything like that. Like, and 10 years later, like I watched other movies from 2013. I'm just like, this is not as good as I thought it was back then. But this one does still hold up very well, like you were saying, and that very much impresses me. Carolyn, what was your popcorn rating, and why did you give it that?
We're all across the board with 4s because with this one in particular, one of the things that struck me was watching the trailer for Evil Dead Rise, and then watching this one is that I don't know if they're using the same cinematographer. I don't know if they're using they're using the same cinematographer or anything like that. But they look like they could be in the same universe just visually. That to me says that it's held up, number one.
Yeah.
And number two, I think that everything about it, just the practical effects, the characters, the story, it's quintessential horror. The only reason why it's not a 5 out of 5 is because we've seen it before, but I think it would bump to a 5 out of 5 for me if I had Sam Raimi's comments on it. And now I genuinely, when we're done with this, I genuinely want to go look for them, because I feel like if he really did sit there and be like, watch this and just kind of quietly be like, and the director's just like, you good, dude? And he's just like, I wanted to do this. I wanted this. It's fine. I'm the producer now. Take the money you need with my blessing, child. Go forth.
Yeah.
Because I would just genuinely be interested in seeing that. But it really, to me, the fact that it holds up so well is what gets it to 4.5, because it really does look like this one and the new one, even though they're 10 years apart, could be in the same world.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. Now since we've been kind of hinting on it, I do want to get into these practical effects, like we've all brought up. Like, there was so much blood in this movie, which I thoroughly enjoyed. But also, hitting back to, they did go back to the original and just update it. Like, when she's getting attacked by the tree and it's slimy, and then that part grosses me out the most, where it crawls up into her. The first one, first time I saw it in the original one kind of freaked me out. I was like, oh, okay. But this is just so nasty and gruesome. But even you get the sister when she's locked in the basement and her eyes and popping up and everything like that. You get Natalie in the bathroom cutting her face open, and then you get the girlfriend cutting her arm off and everything like that, and just like stabbing him in the eye with the needle. Like everything in this movie just creeped me out to a level that he didn't expect him to go to, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Derek, what are your thoughts on all of this stuff?
Yeah, man, I agree, and you know, I don't get grossed out by a lot of things. I've seen some of the more repulsive movies that exist out there in the world. I'm okay. I've processed it. I'm fine. So for me, like it takes a lot for me to kind of get flinch a little bit. And this one actually gets me. I even after having seen it more than once now, like there are the practical effects really sell just the violence and like we talked about, just that brutality and nastiness. I love that scene that you pointed out when she gets taken over and she freezes, and then she pees herself because she's clearly not in control of what she's doing, and then she just turned, and just everything about it is so creepy and so nasty and so just and then they break. It's oh god, it's everything about it is so good, and it's truly incredible that they're able to. And I love technological advancements, and I think the things that we can do with computer animation and special effects are great. But there's just nothing better than somebody that understands how to use real buckets of blood and just pour it all over the set. You can't replace it. And I think those are things that lead to this movie being able to stand the test of time. And having seen Evil Dead Rise, which I know we're going to talk about on Wednesday, they very much exist in the same universe. Whether or not they purposefully do, just cinematography wise and nasty wise and brutality wise, like they very much try to keep that same visual style. And I think it works very, very well. There are just so many scenes that they're so nasty. Like they're so nasty. And that's just hard to do. It's hard to do in horror because we are always trying to one up each other when we're building horror movies, and to make one that is still able to remain this nasty with its practical effects, and just the care and concern they took to make this as visceral and as assaulting as possible. I mean, compliments to the chef. It's great. It's so good.
My cat is destroying things over here. I don't know what he's doing.
I have my door shut, and she keeps reaching her arm underneath. She wants to talk about Evil Dead too. So.
Oh yeah, he'll be over here in a moment. But no, no, I'm everything that you said, Derek. I'm right there with you. For them being in the same realm, the Evil Dead, this one, and Evil Dead Rises, what I do bring up with the fact of they do mention like this is the Sumerian Book of the Dead, and in the second one he says there's 3 different copies of the Book of the Dead, so that's why. But like we'll talk about it on Wednesday. But yes, Carolyn, what did you think about these practical effects? Like, did any of them get you or gross you out? Because I know they did me.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to be very brief on this because I know it is a sensitive topic. There is something incredibly visceral when you're a person who is born with very specific parts and you are dealing with the tree scene. That is extremely visceral, and it was a thing in the 80s. Yeah. When you're dealing with that, there is a special level of, you just watch that and you're just like, you guys watch it and they're like, people born male watch it and they're like, "Ugh." You're like, and I love that it's something, while I hate the concept, I love that it's something that's stayed a staple of the franchise because it really demonstrates a very real fear and invasiveness, and it drives home the horror. So that, to me, for the first one, something you guys haven't touched on with effects is Jane Levy embodying the Deadite, because her it would not have worked as well practically if she wasn't like, if she wasn't twitchy, if she didn't have her eyes constantly open, if she wasn't like genuinely spooky. And for people who have the buckets of blood, you really have to give credit to the actors, and it's this beautiful symphony of every single one of them was they put them through their paces, and every single one of them rose to the challenge because it's fun. It's fun. That's where the humor comes in, I'd imagine, for Raimi and for everyone else. It's fun being bloody and spooky in a fictional setting. And I bet they all had an amazing time. But I think the one that grows, apart from the tree, the one that gets me the most is when they're in the bathroom and Eric's in the bathroom and he's walking in right before he was about to see Naomi cutting her face. And it is not the effects, the physical effect. The physical effect that sells it. Obviously, that's the reveal. What sells it is the sound design. Because he's walking in and he just hears the read. Like something's getting cut, and you're like, what is it? Is she making burgers? What's going on in there? Then you're like, oh no.
And then he slips on a piece of skin and like just everything from start to finish is just, oh my God, it's so good. It's so good.
That's another one that gets. The other one that gets me is when the girlfriend's at the sink, like after the bite, and she's getting the black stuff out of her hand. I'm just like, oh, that's gross. What's going on? But like the practical effects in this movie, I appreciated that they took it back. And I really appreciated that Alvarez let them go there, and the actors trusted him enough to direct them and do all of this. They trusted each other enough to do it.
I wanted to just kind of comment because I think it's really important to talk about this tree scene in a certain light, because I think a lot of times, horror has always been known for being exploitative, especially towards women. And I think it's very interesting to me, at least, to see the care and concern to make it more about the true invasive fear of the experience, instead of trying to make it some kind of over sexualization or because we see it all the time in horror where they do those types of things, but it's purposefully designed to be gross in the wrong ways. And so I think in this one, I know it's a staple of the franchise, but I think that the just the framework of how they do it, to me, I feel like, yes, it's visceral. It's vastly different for me than it is for you, for sure. But the fact that it's not something that repulses you, and it's not something, obviously it repulses you, but it doesn't make you feel, I don't know. It's hard to explain, but I think you kind of understand.
I completely agree with you. I'll give you another example about ways that you can make it, ways when you see it and you know it's a throwaway joke that makes it uncomfortable. And then it is such an uncomfortable topic. I will drop, but I will say, Cabin in the Woods, when they make the joke and they say angry blank tree, and you're like, that's a joke, and it's not that funny. I mean, joke and you laugh a little bit. You're like, when you think about it afterwards, you go, that did not age well. Yeah, that joke did not age well. But because it is something that's very, because it is something that's very serious. You can laugh at it for like 2.5 seconds, but then this. So TLDR, like, I appreciate that because you're absolutely on the money. And just the good visceral practical effects horror, as Eric would say, probably is like, you have to trust each other. I was really struck by that when you said that, like, they really had to trust the director. So I think it's great.
Before we start talking about directing and cinematography, because that is great in this movie as well, I do want to jump back into the chat because Cue Ball gave us his popcorn rating. He says he gives it a 4 out of 5 of the 2013 remake, and when he saw it, he literally started to feel sick at some of the scenes. He almost threw up after watching it. The practical effects looked so real, it scared the shit out of him. So we're right there with you. But I did want to talk about Alvarez, Fede Alvarez, who directed this and wrote the screenplay for it. I want to talk about his directing and the cinematography of this film, because I think, for my aspect of it, like we've been talking about, it's aged very well. They did a good job of lighting, the cinematography, the practical effects, and like just his mind to go into this movie being like, we're going to give a little bit of homages to what Sam Raimi did with like the chainsaw and everything like that, but we're also going to update it and make it feel darker and more creepy and you're alone, secluded. What are your thoughts on the directing and how he did this movie, Carolyn?
I think 10 out of 10, no notes. No. I really do think that if I really, and I am going to go look this up because I really want to know what Sam and he would collaborate about, and in the new, in Evil Dead Rises too. Sam Raimi is such an iconic figure. It's like when you look at when people found out he was going to do Doctor Strange, they were like, oh my God, this is going to be a real horror movie because his name is so associated with very specific techniques. And if he gives his blessing on something, you know that he trusts the vision. So he trusted this guy's vision. And it was so powerful. Excuse me, even if you didn't have that visceralness, the fact that even if you didn't have that, though, you could tell just like by the poster and by all the marketing material, by everything else. And cinematography wise, if you can make a movie that was made, 2 movies that were made 10 years apart, have the same feel, that's just, I mean, like, because if you think of like another movie like The Crow, you have to think about people that do the same set design and stuff like that. If you can make 2 movies 10 years apart that feel the same, you have a talented team.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's a definite good talent team right there.
Yeah.
Derrick, what did you think about the directing and cinematography?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. 10 out of 10, no notes. It's it's wild to me. I was just looking it up right now. It's wild to me that this was his first feature film. So he was a short film director, and he did this, and then Don't Breathe, and then it kind of goes downhill from there, because he did make the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is just an abomination and one of the worst movies made last year.
Honey, no.
But I mean, here with this, it just, I mean, talk about a breakout, like talk about a debut. Like this is, you want to solidify yourself as a genuine horror director. Like this is the way to do it. I think I always like to credit directors that are able to really get their vision out there in a way that feels as purposeful as they meant it. And I think this one really does it. You don't get the sense that he was forced to hold anything back, that he was forced to do something that is out of what he wanted to do. He feels very free, and I think his vision feels very realized. And whether or not that was a partner with Sam Raimi and he's bringing that to life or anything like that, I do think that there's a genuine command in the team that he has. Like I said, with the cast, like they all know what movie they're in. And that's a credit to the director being able to really be able to get his vision out there, and direct them in ways to say, like, this is what I'm trying to do. This is how I want us all to be a part of it. And I think you see that across the board, from the performances to the cinematography, to the sound design, to the stunt work, to the effects. Like, it just being able to bring all of those pieces together and kind of create something that we've all talked about is still just viscerally affronting and assaulting and nasty. That's really hard to do. And it's even harder to make that last for as long as it has. Again, just kind of fast forwarding to Evil Dead Rising, you're saying, Caroline, just the ability for someone to look back 10 years and be like, yeah, I want to do that too. Like, not, I want to change it, I want to remake it, I want to make it better. Like, no. Everything that was done here, I want to just put that in my movie. And that's a testament to a really, really good, well-directed film.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, right there with you. Like, the director of this, like, definitely took his time and was smart. Like you said, this is his first major film and everything like that. Like, he was smart about going like this. I think maybe Hollywood got to him because of that sad, tragic Texas Chainsaw last year. But this one really took his time. And like you were saying, Caroline, to have this one 10 years ago and Evil Dead Rises come out now, and them to be like different, of course, but the same movie, like feeling wise of like set and acting and everything like that, is fantastic to see. But unfortunately, we are running out of time. We've talked about the entire franchise and this. I do want to get your guys' final thoughts on both of these movies, on the entire franchise. Would you recommend people to go see Army of Darkness, even though it's campy and weird? And definitely, would you guys recommend for them to go see the 2013 remake of Evil Dead? We'll start with you on this one, Derrick.
Yeah, I would actually not necessarily recommend Army of Darkness. And it's not a slight to the film. I just think it's very tied to the kind of cultural aspects of itself. Like you have to really be invested in the world of Evil Dead, I think, to really kind of understand and enjoy what's happening. I don't think that means that you can watch Army of Darkness without having anything before or after it. But I do think it truly rests on your own investment in the overall cultural, cult classicdom of Evil Dead as a whole. And I don't know that it works as well on its own. However, I will say that the Evil Dead, the 2013 remake, that one I think you can just watch. If you just want to watch a nasty horror movie that does a lot of things right, you don't need to see anything that came before it. And I don't really even think you need to know anything about what happens after it. It is isolated in the best of ways, because it really does invest all of the things that you see prior all into this movie and just wraps it up and keeps it within itself. So yeah, I don't know that I would recommend Army of Darkness unless you're a huge Evil Dead fan and have somehow skipped it. But I think Evil Dead, the 2013, I would absolutely, if you're a horror fan, I would absolutely recommend this one to you.
Oh yeah. And Carolyn, would you recommend Army of Darkness and the 2013 Evil Dead?
Here's how you watch Army of Darkness. Here's how you watch it. You wait until you're off school in college and you go visit your friends in Los Angeles or New York City, and you find a theater that is like an underground theater, and you get 6 of you and you put one of you guys in costume, and then you buy a lot of drinks. Yep. And then you go and you watch all of these films, and it's important because the carpet's got to smell a little bit. It's got to smell like mothballs, and you got to sit in this. The floor's got to be a little sticky, and there's got to be a couple of people who are really pretentious film critics working the counter, and they're going to be like, "Well, actually, that's how you watch that." And ideally, there will be a film 1 or 2 ahead of it, and then you go afterwards, and it's 3 a.m. and you go to IHOP. That's how you watch Army of Darkness. Now,
she's not wrong. And even as a film critic, I was like, yeah, well, actually, she's right. That's
the correct way to do it.
That is exactly the correct way to do it. And there has to be at least one Ash cosplayer who's a guy, and there has to be at least one Ash cosplayer who presents as a female. Yep. And the Ash cosplayer who presents as a female has to be hot. That's just the way it goes.
100%.
And then, but the 2013 Evil Dead, you could literally just rent on Amazon Prime and watch it. You could watch it in that, circumstance. You could watch it at home. You could, do like I did and buy it on Prime, which I did today. You're welcome, Sony. You're welcome, everybody. But it's that one I would 100% recommend do that, and watch that one. It's a must. It's a staple if you do want to study the genre. If the stars align and you get scenario number 1, go forth to Army of Darkness with my blessing, because that's how and that is the only way to see a 90s movie like that. Just not the Super Mario Brothers movie.
No. No amount of drinks and or edibles can make that watchable and make that experience a good one. None. And that's speaking as somebody who owns that movie on DVD. So
same. I do too. Yeah. I would definitely recommend watching Army of Darkness, but definitely Carolyn's way for sure. But if you go back and start with Evil Dead 91 and then go back to Evil Dead 2, which is 97, definitely follow like the frame of everything's going. Just because, Bruce Campbell, who doesn't love Bruce Campbell, just watch it for him. You're going to enjoy your time. The 2013 version, I definitely recommend just because of the practical effects, the acting, the directing, like overall, it's just such a great movie. For it being 10 years old, I didn't think it was that old actually, but it holds up. And if you love horror, you will love this movie. But that is all the time that we have today, guys. I want to thank you both so much for coming and talking about the plethora of Evil Dead that we just did. And I want, if you guys want, wow, stumbling over my words today right now. Go ahead and let everybody out there know where they can find you, what you're doing. We'll start with you on this one, Derrick.
Yeah, so you guys can check me out on nerdbot.com. You can always find new reviews. I've been slacking a little bit, so I spent like all weekend just watching and catching up on all the new movies. So I think I watched like 11 movies this weekend. Just trying to play catch up. So I've seen everything now. But yeah, you can definitely check it out on nerdbot.com. New reviews pretty much all the time. And you can follow me on social media at DRock Comedy, CROK Comedy on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to follow me on Facebook, yes, I'm still on Facebook. I'm 40, so that's what happens. And you can just type in my name, Derrick Murray, and you'll find me. So
nice. And Carolyn, what can everybody out there find you?
So the Bird app is still active. You can find me at Carolyn in Fandom, CarolynNin Fandom, FANDOM. You can find me at Carolyn's Geek Out on Instagram, and you can find me at Caroline/cosplay on TikTok, because the TikTok is still active, and while I may be only 35, about to turn 36, I'm still on TikTok because I like it. And other than that, if you're looking for anywhere else, you can find me out in the spooky woods.
Yes, of course. Yes, look for her in the spooky woods. Maybe not alone. But thank you guys for joining us. You can find me, again, I'm your host, Erric Ramirez. You can find me on all socials except for the Bird app at Heartless7. That's HARTL, the number 3 SS7. But I want to thank you guys all for tuning in, and be sure to join our Discord to keep this conversation going, as well as subscribing to all of our other platforms at Nom Talk Network. And then please tune in on Wednesday, where we will be talking about the new Evil Dead Rise, which is going to be a great conversation as well. But then again, I'm your host, and everybody out there, have a nomorific day.